They thought my pool was theirs. 27 times they broke in. 27 times I warned her. But when I finally filled it with concrete, Karen didn't just complain, she called the cops and accused me of destroying her property. What happened next? Let's just say the police found something buried in my backyard that changed everything. The first time Marcus Webb found the Martinez kids in his pool, he thought it was an honest mistake. It was mid-June, 3 weeks after he'd moved into the modest ranch house on Maple Drive. He'd been unpacking boxes in his garage when he heard the splashing, high-pitched laughter cutting through the afternoon heat. He walked around the side of his house, past the overgrown hedges he hadn't had time to trim, and stopped dead. 2 children, maybe 8 and 10 years old, were doing cannonballs off his pool's edge. Their mother sat on his deck chair, scrolling through her phone, a sweating glass of what looked like lemonade beside her. His lemonade, from his pitcher, that he'd left on his kitchen counter. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his voice steady despite the anger beginning to simmer in his chest. The woman looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. She was blonde, probably in her late 30s, wearing oversized sunglasses and a white linen cover-up. She didn't stand. Didn't even look embarrassed. "Oh, you must be the new neighbor," she said, as if that explained everything. "I'm Karen Martinez. We live right next door." She gestured vaguely toward the house on the left. "The Hendersons used to let us use the pool whenever we wanted. They were so generous." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "That's great." "I'm not the Hendersons." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Well, obviously. But it's such a hot day, and our AC is broken. The kids were just miserable." She said it like he was supposed to feel guilty. Like his pool was a public service. "Ma'am, this is private property. You can't just—" "Oh, don't be like that." She waved her hand dismissively. "It's just a pool. You're not even using it. That's not the point. Mommy, can we stay 5 more minutes?" The younger boy called out, treading water. Karen looked at Marcus expectantly, eyebrows raised above her sunglasses. Waiting for him to be reasonable, Marcus took a breath. He'd spent the last 3 years working as a trauma nurse in Philadelphia, dealing with gunshot wounds, overdoses, and parents screaming at him because he couldn't save their kids. He'd moved to this quiet suburb specifically to avoid conflict, to heal. 5 minutes, he said finally. "Then I need you all to leave," Karen beamed. "See? I knew you'd understand. You're going to fit in great here." She didn't move for 20 minutes. When she finally gathered her kids, she didn't apologize. She didn't thank him. She just walked through his side gate like she owned the place, leaving wet footprints across his deck and a used towel draped over his fence. Marcus stood there, staring at the towel, and told himself it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. The second time was 4 days later. Marcus had just gotten home from a 12-hour shift at St. Catherine's Hospital when he saw them. Same kids, same mother. This time Karen had brought floaties and a cooler. He marched outside, still in his scrubs. "Mrs. Martinez." "Oh, Marcus." She looked up from her magazine, all smiles. "We were just talking about you. I told the kids how nice you were last time." "I said 5 minutes, once. That didn't mean you could come back whenever you want." Her smile faltered slightly. "I don't understand why you're being so hostile. We're neighbors. Neighbors share. Neighbors ask permission. I would have, but you weren't home. And like I said, the Hendersons—" "I don't care about the Hendersons." Marcus's voice rose despite himself. He saw the kids stop swimming, watching with wide eyes. He forced himself to lower his voice. "This is my property. You need to leave. Now." Karen stood up slowly, gathering her things with exaggerated movements. "You know I tried to be friendly. I tried to be understanding. But clearly you're one of those people." "What people?" "Selfish people." She herded her kids toward the gate, glancing back at him. "This is a community, Marcus. We look out for each other here. But I guess you wouldn't understand that." She left. Marcus changed the code on his gate lock that night. The 3rd time. They climbed the fence. Marcus came home to find his motion sensor camera had recorded them. Karen boosting her kids over the 6-foot wooden barrier, then struggling over herself in her sundress. They'd spent 2 hours in his pool. He saved the footage and went next door. Karen answered wearing a bathrobe, her hair wet. "Yes? You climbed my fence." "I don't know what you're talking about." I have video. Something flickered across her face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. That fence is between our properties. Technically, I have as much right to it as you do. The pool is on my side. Barely. If you measured properly, you'd probably find that the property line actually cuts right through it. The Hendersons never cared about exact boundaries. Marcus felt a headache forming behind his eyes. Stay out of my pool, Mrs. Martinez. I'm asking you nicely. And I'm telling you, you're being ridiculous. She started to close the door. If you're going to be difficult, maybe you should just move somewhere else. We were here first. The door shut in his face. By mid-July, it had happened 11 times. 11 times he'd come home to find them in his pool. He'd called the police twice. Both times, the officer, a bored-looking cop named Daniels, had shrugged and said it was a civil matter. Just tell her not to come back, Daniels had advised. I have. Multiple times. Then get a restraining order. Marcus had looked into it. The process would take months, cost thousands in legal fees, and there was no guarantee it would work. He tried other solutions. He bought a pool cover. Karen cut through it. He installed a higher fence. She brought a ladder. He put up no trespassing signs. She tore them down. Each time she'd smile that same infuriating smile and tell him he was overreacting, that he was being unwelcoming, that the Hendersons had been so much nicer. By August, Marcus had stopped counting. He'd started working extra shifts just to avoid being home. His blood pressure was up. He wasn't sleeping. The peaceful suburban life he'd imagined had turned into a daily battle with a woman who genuinely seemed to believe she had more right to his property than he did. Then, on August 15th, he came home to find Karen's husband in his backyard. Dan Martinez was a tall man with a beer gut and thinning hair, standing by the pool with his arms crossed. When he saw Marcus, he didn't look embarrassed. He looked angry. "We need to talk," Dan said. Marcus set down his bag slowly. "Your wife needs to stop trespassing." "My wife says you've been harassing her, making her feel unsafe in her own neighborhood. Your wife breaks into my yard almost every day." "It's a pool, man. Just a pool. Why are you being such a dick about it?" Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Get off my property, or what?" Dan stepped closer. He was bigger than Marcus, outweighed him by at least 50 pounds. "You gonna call the cops again?" "They're not coming. Daniels is my brother-in-law. He's tired of your complaints." Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check." Dan jabbed a finger toward Marcus's chest. "You've got two choices. You can be cool about this, let us use the pool like civilized people. Or you can keep making trouble and find out what happens to people who don't fit in around here." He left Marcus standing there, shaking with rage and something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like fear. That night, Marcus sat in his kitchen with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink and stared at his phone. He pulled up the contact information for pool removal companies. Concrete contractors, it would cost him $12,000. Money he'd been saving for a new car. Money that represented 6 months of overtime shifts and skipped meals. But it would end this. It would finally end this. He made the call. 2 weeks later, on a sweltering Saturday morning, a cement truck pulled up to Marcus Webb's house. Karen Martinez came running out of her house in her bathrobe, screaming before the first load of concrete hit the water. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Marcus stood on his deck, arms crossed, and watched his pool disappear beneath gray sludge. "Solving a problem," he said quietly. Karen's face went purple. "You can't do this. That's destruction of community property. I'm calling the police." "It's my property. Do what you want." She did. Within 20 minutes, 2 squad cars were parked in front of his house, and Officer Daniels was standing in Marcus's backyard, staring at the half-filled pool with an expression that was hard to read. "Sir," Daniels said slowly, "Mrs. Martinez claims you're destroying shared property." "It's not shared. It's mine. She says the property line is 6 feet that way." Marcus pointed. "I had it surveyed last month. Would you like to see the documentation?" Karen pushed forward. "He's lying!" "The Hendersons always said." "The Hendersons don't own this property anymore," Marcus interrupted. "I do. And I can do whatever I want with my pool." Daniels looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. Look, if this is your property, then technically it's not, Karen shrieked. There's something wrong with him. He's been hostile since day one. He threatened my children. He's destroying evidence. That pool, there's something... She stopped abruptly, her face going pale. Marcus noticed it. Daniels noticed it too. Ma'am? Daniels asked. There's something what? Karen's mouth opened and closed. Nothing, the property values. He's destroying property values. But something had shifted in the air. Something in the way she'd stopped mid-sentence. In the way her husband Dan had appeared from their yard, grabbing her arm with a grip that looked too tight. Come on, Karen, Dan muttered. Leave it. No! He can't just... Karen. Dan's voice was sharp, final. Daniels watched them go, then turned back to Marcus. You have that survey documentation? Inside. Want me to get it? Yeah. And Mr. Webb? Maybe don't leave town for a few days. Marcus frowned. Why would I leave town? Daniels glanced at the half-filled pool, at the Martinez house, at something Marcus couldn't see. Just a feeling. Something about this doesn't sit right. He left. The concrete crew finished their work, and Marcus went inside, exhausted but relieved. It was over. Finally over. He had no idea how wrong he was. The concrete had barely dried when the phone calls started. The first came at 6 a.m, 3 days after the pool was filled. Marcus was getting ready for an early shift when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Webb? This is Sandra Kellerman from the Homeowners Association. We've received a complaint about unauthorized construction on your property. Marcus closed his eyes. Of course there was an HOA. Of course Karen had found another angle. It's not construction. I filled in my own pool. Yes, well, according to our bylaws, any exterior modifications require advance approval from the board. You'll need to submit Form 27B, along with a site plan and a non-refundable application fee of $500. The pool is already filled. That doesn't negate the requirement. Mr. Webb, if you fail to comply, we'll have to issue a fine. $50 per day until the paperwork is filed. She hung up before he could argue. Marcus stared at his phone, then at his coffee, and decided he needed something stronger. The second call came that afternoon. This time it was the Township Zoning Office. Mr. Webb, we've received an anonymous report that you may have altered your property's drainage system. Did you recently fill a large depression in your yard? It was a pool. My pool. I see. And did you file for a grading permit? I didn't know I needed one. The woman on the other end sighed. Any change to your property that affects water drainage requires a permit. We'll need to send an inspector. There's a $300 inspection fee. This is insane. Those are the regulations, sir. The inspector will contact you within 10 business days. Marcus hung up and immediately called the concrete company. Did you guys pull any permits? For filling a pool? The foreman laughed. Nobody pulls permits for that. It's your property. Apparently the township disagrees. Huh. Well, that's a first. We've done 50 of these jobs. Never had a problem. He paused. You piss off a neighbor or something? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. By the end of the week, Marcus had received a citation from the HOA, $350 in fines, plus the $500 application fee. A notice from the zoning office, inspection scheduled, fee required. A letter from a lawyer named Brentwood claiming the pool had been a community amenity and its removal constituted willful destruction of neighborhood character. A call from his insurance company, asking if it was true he'd made major alterations to his property without notifying them. Karen was standing at the edge of her driveway each time he came home, watching him with a small, satisfied smile. On Friday evening, Marcus went next door. He was still in his scrubs, still smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion. He'd just finished a shift where he'd held the hand of a 19-year-old kid with a gunshot wound to the chest, watching the life drain out of him despite everything Marcus did. He had nothing left for games. He rang the doorbell. Dan answered. What do you want? Tell your wife to stop. Stop what? You know what. The calls. The complaints. The lawyer. Dan's face was blank. I don't know what you're talking about. I filled in my own pool. That's it. I didn't break any laws. I didn't hurt anyone. Tell her to let it go. Maybe you should have thought about that before you destroyed community property. Dan started to close the door. Marcus put his hand against it. It wasn't community property. The Hendersons disagreed. The Hendersons are gone. Dan's eyes hardened. Yeah, they are. Funny how that worked out. Something in his tone made Marcus pause. What does that mean? Nothing. Just that people who don't fit in around here tend to move on. Dan pushed the door closed harder this time. You should think about that. Marcus stood on the porch for a long moment, his hand still tingling from where the door had hit it. People who don't fit in tend to move on. He went home and did something he should have done months ago. He searched for Henderson Maple Drive and started digging. The Hendersons had lived at 847 Maple Drive for 6 years. Robert and Linda Henderson, both retired teachers. They'd put the house on the market suddenly in March, 8 months ago. The listing had described it as a motivated sale, real estate speak for desperate. Marcus found their forwarding address through the post office redirect service, cross-referenced it with social media, and finally found Linda Henderson's Facebook profile. She'd moved to Arizona. Her page was mostly private, but one post from April was public. Finally sleeping through the night again. Bob says I need to let it go, but I'm still so angry. 6 years of our lives. 6 years of trying to be good neighbors, and that's what we got. At least we're out. At least we're safe. The comments below were supportive, but vague. So glad you're away from that situation. You deserved better. Some people are just toxic. Marcus sent her a private message. Mrs. Henderson, I'm your old neighbor at 847 Maple Drive. I bought your house in May. Would you be willing to talk to me about why you left? He didn't expect a response. But 10 minutes later, his phone rang. Arizona area code, Mr. Webb. The woman's voice was cautious. Tired. Yes. Thank you for calling me back. Are they doing it to you, too? No preamble. No small talk. The Martinezes? Marcus felt his chest tighten. The pool? A bitter laugh. It started with the pool. Then it was our garden. Then our driveway. Karen said we were parking too close to the property line. Then our tree was dropping leaves in her yard. Then our dog barked too much. Then our grandkids were too loud when they visited. What happened? Linda was quiet for a moment. They made our lives hell, Mr. Webb. Every single day, something new. Karen would file complaints with the HOA, with the township, with anyone who would listen. Dan would stand in his yard and stare at our house. Just stare. For hours. Why didn't you fight back? We tried. God, we tried. We got lawyers. We documented everything. We called the police. Her voice cracked. Then our dog died. Vet said it was poison. Antifreeze, probably. We couldn't prove anything, but Marcus felt cold. Jesus. We sold the house at a loss. $40,000 less than we paid for it just to get out. Bob wanted to stay, wanted to fight it out. But I couldn't anymore. I was having panic attacks. I wasn't sleeping. I told him I'd rather lose the money than lose my mind. Did you ever find out why? Why they targeted you? Because we said no. Linda's voice was flat. The first month we lived there, Karen asked if she could use our pool. We said yes, just to be neighborly. But then it became every day. Then she started coming over when we weren't home. Then she started inviting her friends. We finally told her it needed to stop, and she trailed off. That's when everything else started. Marcus closed his eyes. I filled in the pool. Good. That's good. But she didn't sound like she thought it was good. She sounded like she thought he'd made a terrible mistake. Mr. Webb, I need to tell you something. Be careful. There's something wrong with that family. With that whole street, really. What do you mean? Officer Daniels, he's Dan's brother-in-law like they told you. But it's more than that. Karen's sister works in the zoning office. Her cousin is on the HOA board. Her uncle owns the largest construction company in town. They're connected everywhere. Linda took a shaky breath. We tried to get help, tried to get someone to listen, but everywhere we turned, there was another Martinez connection. Another person who'd grown up with them, went to school with them, owed them a favor. That can't be legal. Legal doesn't matter when nobody will enforce the law. She paused. Mr. Webb, I'm going to tell you what I wish someone had told us. Sell the house. Take the loss. Get out before it gets worse. It's already worse. I spent $12,000 filling that pool. Then you've already lost. I'm sorry, but you have. You can either lose $12,000 and walk away, or you can stay and lose everything." Her voice dropped. "We stayed too long. Don't make our mistake." She hung up. Marcus sat in his darkening living room, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of her words settling over him like concrete. He didn't sell. He couldn't. This was supposed to be his fresh start, his escape from the chaos of the city. He'd used every penny of his savings for the down payment. If he sold now with all the problems Karen had created, he'd lose everything. So he stayed. And he fought. He filed counter-complaints with the HOA, documenting every violation of the bylaws on Karen's property. Her lawn was 2 inches too tall. Her garbage cans were visible from the street. Her decorative garden gnome exceeded the maximum allowed height for lawn ornaments. He attended the zoning hearing and brought his survey documentation, proving the pool had been entirely on his property and its removal had actually improved drainage. He hired his own lawyer, a bulldog named Patricia Reeves, who specialized in property disputes, and had her send cease and desist letters to everyone Karen had weaponized against him. It cost him. God, it cost him. Between legal fees and fines and inspection costs, he was hemorrhaging money. He picked up extra shifts, worked doubles, survived on coffee and spite. But he wasn't leaving. He wasn't giving Karen the satisfaction. Then, in mid-September, something changed. Marcus came home from a night shift to find police cars in front of the Martinez house. Not 1 or 2, 5 cars, plus an unmarked SUV. Officers in plain clothes carrying boxes out of the house while Dan stood on the porch shouting about warrants. Marcus pulled into his driveway and got out slowly, watching. Karen was nowhere to be seen. Officer Daniels stood by one of the cruisers, looking significantly less bored than usual. When he saw Marcus, he walked over. "Mr. Webb, you're up early. Night shift. What's going on?" Daniels glanced back at the Martinez house. Something complicated moved across his face. Embarrassment, maybe, or shame. "Can't say much, but you might want to stay inside today. Keep your doors locked. Is Karen okay?" "Karen's fine. She's being questioned." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The kids are with child services." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What happened?" "Like I said, can't talk about it." Daniel started to walk away, then stopped. "Mr. Webb, I owe you an apology. I thought you were just being difficult, causing problems over nothing. I didn't." He shook his head. "I should have listened better." He walked away before Marcus could respond. Marcus went inside and stood at his kitchen window, watching the police carry box after box out of the Martinez house. Evidence bags, computer equipment, file folders. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Linda Henderson. Are you watching the news?" He turned on his TV. The local news was covering a developing story. Arrests made this morning in connection with a multi-state fraud scheme. Karen Martinez, 38, and Daniel Martinez, 42, of Maple Drive are accused of identity theft, wire fraud, and filing false insurance claims. According to prosecutors, the couple allegedly stole the identities of their neighbors, opening credit cards and loans in their names. Marcus sat down hard on his couch. Investigation began after a routine background check flagged suspicious activity. Authorities say the Martinezes targeted at least 15 families over the past 8 years, stealing more than $400,000. Several victims report being harassed and intimidated when they tried to... The anchor continued, but Marcus couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. That's why they'd wanted access to his house. Why Karen had been so insistent, so aggressive. She hadn't wanted the pool. She'd wanted to get inside, to find documents, personal information, account numbers. The Hendersons. How many others? His phone rang. Patricia Reeves, his lawyer. "Marcus, turn on. I'm watching. There's more. The police found something when they were executing the search warrant." She paused. "They found evidence that Karen had been planning to file fraudulent injury claims against you. She was going to have her kids slip by your pool, claim you'd created a dangerous condition. Medical bills, pain and suffering, the works." Jesus Christ. The concrete filling probably saved you from a $100,000 lawsuit. Patricia's voice was grim. "Marcus, they're going to want to talk to you." The detectives. "You were the one who wouldn't play along, who wouldn't let them in. You might be the reason they finally got caught." Marcus ended the call and walked to his back window. He looked out at the smooth concrete slab where his pool used to be. $12,000. The worst decision he'd thought he'd ever made. It had saved him. He was still standing there when the doorbell rang. 2 detectives, badges out, asking if he had time to answer some questions. Marcus invited them in. He told them everything, every trespass, every threat, every complaint Karen had filed. He showed them his documentation, his videos, his timeline. The detectives took notes, their expressions darkening with each detail. "Mr. Webb," the older detective said finally, "we're going to need you to check your credit report, all 3 bureaus, and your bank accounts. Look for anything unusual. You think they already? We found a file in their house labeled with your address. We're not sure what's in it yet, but—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Marcus checked that night. There were 3 credit cards he'd never opened, a personal loan he'd never taken out, a medical bill from a hospital he'd never been to. Total fraudulent charges, $47,000. In his backyard, the concrete slab sat silent and solid, covering the hole that had nearly swallowed his entire life. The investigation consumed everything. Marcus spent the next 3 weeks living in a surreal nightmare of police interviews, fraud reports, and credit freezes. Detectives came and went from his house at odd hours, always apologetic, always needing just one more thing. His dining room table disappeared beneath stacks of financial documents, affidavits, and victim impact statements. The neighborhood transformed overnight. Where before Marcus had been the outsider, the difficult new neighbor who wouldn't share, now he was the hero who'd exposed the Martinez's crimes. People he'd never met knocked on his door with casseroles and sympathy, eager to tell their own stories. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down. "They got me for $12,000. Opened a credit card in my husband's name after he died. I thought I was going crazy." The Patels across the street. "Medical bills. Karen said their son needed emergency surgery. Could they use our insurance information just to check if we were in network?" We thought we were being helpful. Tom Rodriguez, who lived at the corner. "They stole my identity to buy a car. I didn't know until the repo man showed up at my work. 15 families, 8 years. Over $400,000 in confirmed fraud, and the number kept climbing as more victims came forward. But it was the Martinez kids that haunted Marcus. He'd seen them through his window that first day, Ryan, 8, and Tyler, 10, being led out of their house by a child services worker. They'd looked confused, clutching backpacks and stuffed animals, turning back to see their father in handcuffs on the porch. Marcus had wanted to hate them. They'd been part of it after all, the props in their mother's schemes, the innocent faces that had made people open their doors and lower their guards. But they were just kids. Kids who'd been taught that stealing was normal, that manipulation was how families survived. What kind of life would they have now? He pushed the thought away. Not his problem. Not his responsibility. The preliminary hearing was set for October 15th. Marcus took the day off work, put on the only suit he owned, and drove to the county courthouse. The building was older than the town itself. All stone columns and brass fixtures, built in an era when people still believed in the majesty of justice. Patricia Reeves met him on the steps. She'd dressed up too, power suit, briefcase, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like she was ready for war. "Ready?" she asked. "Do I have a choice?" "Not really." She pushed through the heavy doors. "The prosecutor wants you to testify today. Just preliminary stuff. Establishing the pattern of behavior, the harassment, the trespassing. Save the identity theft details for the actual trial. When will that be?" "Could be months. Could be a year." She glanced at him. "These things take time. You prepared for that?" Marcus thought about his maxed-out credit cards, his depleted savings, the extra shifts he'd been working just to stay afloat. "I don't have a choice about that either." The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected. Oak benches, fluorescent lights, a judge's bench that looked like it had been installed sometime in the 1970s. A handful of people sat in the gallery, other victims, Marcus realized. Mrs. Chen, the Patels, Tom Rodriguez, all of them looking tired and angry and ready for something that felt like justice. Karen and Dan Martinez sat at the defense table with their lawyers, expensive suits, leather briefcases, the kind of attorneys you hired when you'd stolen enough money to afford them. Dan looked deflated, his beer gut straining against a dress shirt that didn't quite fit. But Karen looked exactly the same as she always had. Perfect blonde hair, careful makeup, that same small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She turned when Marcus entered and their eyes met. She didn't look away, didn't look ashamed or afraid or remorseful. She looked amused. Marcus felt something cold slither down his spine. The judge entered. Woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and an expression that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of human stupidity. Everyone stood, then sat. The bailiff called the case. The People versus Karen Louise Martinez and Daniel James Martinez. Charges include identity theft, wire fraud, filing false insurance claims, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The prosecutor stood, a sharp-eyed man named Morrison, who'd interviewed Marcus twice already. Your Honor, the People are prepared to present evidence of a systematic fraud scheme spanning multiple years and affecting at least 15 victims in this jurisdiction. Karen's lawyer stood. His name was Whitmore, and he had the kind of smooth voice that made everything sound reasonable. Your Honor, my clients maintain their innocence. What the prosecution characterizes as fraud was actually a series of unfortunate misunderstandings and poor record-keeping. We'll be filing motions to dismiss based on insufficient evidence. Save it for trial, Mr. Whitmore. The judge looked at Morrison. Call your first witness. The People call Marcus Webb. Marcus walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water. The bailiff swore him in. He sat. The courtroom felt too bright, too small, too full of eyes watching him. Morrison approached with a kind smile. Mr. Webb, can you tell us when you first met the defendants? June 12th. I'd just moved in. And what were the circumstances of that meeting? Marcus took a breath and told the story. The kids in his pool, Karen on his deck chair, the lemonade she'd helped herself to, her assumption that his property was hers to use, and what happened after you asked them to leave. They came back, multiple times. I'd come home from work and find them in my pool. I changed the locks on my gate. They climbed the fence. How many times did this occur? 27. I documented each instance. He'd memorized the number. It had become a talisman, proof that he wasn't crazy, that this had really happened. Morrison nodded. And did you ever give the defendants permission to use your pool? Once the first time? I said they could stay 5 minutes, then they needed to leave. That was it. But they kept coming back. Yes. Did you ask them to stop? Multiple times. I asked Karen directly. I called the police. I put up signs. Nothing worked. Morrison pulled out a folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence security camera footage from Mr. Webb's property, showing the defendants trespassing on multiple occasions. The judge nodded. A screen descended from the ceiling. The courtroom lights dimmed. Marcus watched himself on camera. Watched Karen boost her kids over his fence. Watched her cut through his pool cover with scissors. Watched her tear down his no trespassing signs and stuff them in his garbage can. Watched her husband Dan stand in Marcus's backyard, chest to chest with him, his finger jabbing toward Marcus's face. The footage was damning, undeniable. But when Marcus glanced at Karen, she was still smiling. Morrison continued. Mr. Webb, did there come a time when you decided to fill in your pool? Yes, in August. Why? Because nothing else worked. Locks, cameras, police calls, none of it stopped them. So I removed what they wanted. That must have been expensive. $12,000. A murmur ran through the courtroom. $12,000 to fill in a pool you owned, because your neighbors wouldn't leave you alone. And how did the defendants react? Karen called the police. She claimed I was destroying community property, that the pool somehow belonged to her. Morrison nodded slowly. Mr. Webb, in the course of this investigation, did you learn anything that shed light on why the defendants were so insistent about accessing your property? Marcus's mouth went dry. Yes, they were inside my house, multiple times, while I was at work. My security footage showed Karen entering through the back door, I found out later she'd made a copy of the key the Hendersons used to keep under a flower pot. And what do you believe she was doing in your house? Looking for personal information, social security numbers, bank statements, insurance documents. His voice hardened. Building a file so she could steal my identity. Whitmore shot to his feet. Objection! Speculation! Sustained. The judge looked at Marcus. Stick to what you observed, Mr. Webb. Morrison pulled out another document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a file recovered from the defendant's home during the execution of a search warrant. The file is labeled 847 Maple Drive, Mr. Webb's address, and contains photocopies of documents including his driver's license, bank statements, and medical insurance cards. The courtroom went silent. Even Whitmore looked shaken. Morrison continued softly. Mr. Webb, when did you become aware that the defendants had opened fraudulent accounts in your name? September 21st, after they were arrested. The detectives told me to check my credit report. Marcus felt the old anger rising. 3 credit cards I never opened. A personal loan, medical bills, $47,000 in charges. And you didn't authorize any of those accounts? No. Did you give the defendants access to your personal information? Never. I didn't even let them in my house. His voice rose despite himself. That's why I filled in the pool. That's why I did everything I could to keep them out. And they still managed to... Thank you, Mr. Webb. Morrison turned to the judge. No further questions. Whitmore stood for cross-examination. He had the look of a man who knew he was losing but was being paid too much to quit. Mr. Webb, isn't it true that you were hostile toward my clients from the very first day? I wasn't hostile. I was setting boundaries. You refused to let children use a pool on a hot day. I refused to let strangers use my property without permission. But the previous owners... I'm not the previous owners. Whitmore's smile was thin. You seem very concerned with property rights, Mr. Webb. Very territorial. It's my property. Yes, you've made that quite clear. Whitmore paced. Isn't it true that you installed extensive security measures? Cameras, new locks, motion sensors? After your clients repeatedly trespassed, yes. Some might say that's excessive. Paranoid, even. Patricia stood. Objection. Is there a question here? I'll rephrase. Whitmore turned back to Marcus. Mr. Webb, did you ever consider that my clients might have had legitimate access to your property? That perhaps the property line isn't where you think it is? I had it surveyed, professionally. After you'd already filled in the pool. The timeline doesn't change the results. Whitmore pulled out a document. I have here a statement from the Hendersons, the previous owners, stating that they had a verbal agreement with my clients allowing pool access. Doesn't that suggest the Hendersons sold the house? Any agreement they had ended when I bought the property. But you never told my clients that explicitly, did you? You just became hostile, and I told Karen Martinez to stay out of my yard at least 10 times. Marcus's voice was steel now. I have those conversations on video. Would you like me to count them for you? Whitmore's jaw tightened. He glanced at his notes, then at Karen. Something passed between them. Some calculation. Some decision. No further questions. Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, feeling hollowed out. He'd done his part. Told his truth. Now it was up to the system. The prosecutor called 2 more witnesses, Mrs. Chen and Tom Rodriguez. They told their stories. Credit cards opened in dead husbands' names. Cars purchased with stolen identities. The same pattern of harassment when they'd tried to confront the Martinezes. Then it was the defense's turn. Whitmore called a character witness, Karen's sister Emily, who worked in the zoning office. She testified about what a good mother Karen was, how involved she was in the community, how the charges were probably just a misunderstanding. Morrison's cross-examination was brief and brutal. Ms. Whitmore, isn't it true that you used your position in the zoning office to file complaints against neighbors who refused to cooperate with your sister? Emily's face went red. That's not yes or no. I was just doing my job. A job that happened to help your sister intimidate people? Objection! Whitmore was on his feet, but the damage was done.